The Hand of the King wasn't just a title, it was the most dangerous job in Westeros. The man who built what kings only dreamed, commanded armies in their name, and held the realm together when the throne itself was falling apart. From disgraced maesters serving mad queens to political architects who ruled entire kingdoms from the shadows. Why do some hands become legends while others end up dead in the Tower of the Hand? And which one was secretly running Westeros all along? Qyburn. Qyburn never should have been anywhere near the Iron Throne. A disgraced maester stripped of his chain by the Citadel for conducting unethical experiments on living subjects, he spent years operating in the shadows of Westeros before attaching himself to Cersei Lannister, the one person whose appetite for power matched his own appetite for forbidden knowledge. His rise began at Harrenhal, where Roose Bolton left him for dead after the Lannister capture. He survived, made his way to King's Landing, and systematically made himself indispensable to Cersei by doing the things no one else would. He transformed the dying Gregor Clegane into an undead weapon through procedures the Citadel would have called abomination. He built a network of informants that rivaled Varys' little birds. He mass-produced scorpion crossbows specifically engineered to bring down dragons, a genuine strategic innovation that nearly ended Daenerys' campaign before it began. When Cersei was crowned queen at the end of Season 6, she named Qyburn her hand, but his tenure revealed the fundamental limit of his power. Everything he built served Cersei's paranoia rather than the realm's stability. He extended her rule through fear, surveillance, and violence, but never made the kingdom stronger. When the Mountain, his greatest creation, turned on him in the Red Keep during Daenerys' attack, Qyburn died as he had lived, a useful instrument whose value had finally run out. Ned Stark. Ned Stark became Hand of the King for one reason. Robert Baratheon asked him, and Ned was constitutionally incapable of refusing a duty he believed in. He left Winterfell, the family he loved, and the life he understood to serve a king who had already stopped caring about ruling. It was an act of loyalty that became his execution. As Hand, Ned governed with the same blunt honesty that defined everything he did. He discovered almost immediately that the crown was 3 million gold dragons in debt, largely to the Lannisters, and that the small council was functionally run by Littlefinger and Varys while Robert hunted and drank. He tried to stop Robert from ordering Daenerys' assassination, arguing that murdering a young woman in exile wasn't justice. He refused to sign off on tournament expenditures the crown couldn't afford. He investigated Jon Arryn's death and uncovered the truth about Joffrey's parentage, the secret that had gotten his predecessor killed. That truth was what destroyed him. Ned discovered that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were Cersei and Jaime's children, not Robert's, making them illegitimate heirs with no legal claim to the throne. He confronted Cersei directly, gave her a chance to flee before Robert returned, and trusted Littlefinger to secure the City Watch's loyalty. Every one of those decisions was a catastrophic miscalculation. In a city where information was currency and mercy was weakness, Ned Stark's honor made him the most honest hand in Westerosi history, and the least equipped to survive it. Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn is the Hand whose story never got told on screen, yet everything that happens across 8 seasons of Game of Thrones begins with his death. Lord of the Eyrie, head of one of the oldest and most powerful houses in Westeros, Jon served as Hand of the King under Robert Baratheon for 17 years and held the realm together through sheer steady competence while Robert progressively abandoned his responsibilities. Before he was Hand, Jon Arryn had already changed history. During Robert's rebellion, it was Jon who refused to surrender Robert and Ned Stark to Aerys II when the Mad King demanded their heads, a refusal that ignited the rebellion that ended Targaryen rule. He raised the 2 young lords as his own wards and fought alongside them to place Robert on the throne. Robert never forgot that debt. As Hand, Jon governed in Robert's name for nearly 2 decades, managing the crown's finances, maintaining peace between the great houses, and ensuring the daily machinery of the kingdom kept functioning despite a king who preferred hunting to ruling. He discovered the same secret Ned later uncovered, that Joffrey and his siblings were Cersei and Jaime's children, and began investigating quietly. That investigation killed him. Littlefinger poisoned him with the Tears of Lys, administered by his own wife Lysa, ending the life of the man who had unknowingly held Westeros together for a generation. Jon Arryn's greatest legacy was the stability he provided, and how quickly everything collapsed once he was gone. Davos Seaworth. Davos Seaworth became Hand of the King under the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. A former smuggler from Flea Bottom who had fingers shortened by the man he later served loyally, Davos had no noble blood, no formal education, and no political training. What he had instead was something rarer in Westeros: complete, unconditional honesty combined with genuine moral courage. Stannis Baratheon named Davos his hand after discovering that his previous advisor had been secretly attempting to negotiate a surrender to the Lannisters. The choice wasn't obvious. Davos was a common-born man in a world that ran on birthright and family name, but Stannis understood that Davos was the one person in his council who would tell him the truth regardless of the consequences, including the truth about Melisandre's influence over Stannis' decisions. As Hand, Davos consistently served as the conscience of Stannis' campaign, arguing against the assassination of Robb Stark, freeing Princess Shireen from imprisonment, and eventually saving her life by arranging her escape when he discovered Melisandre's plans. That last act cost him everything. Stannis had him arrested. His position as Hand became hollow, but Davos' story didn't end there. After Stannis' death, he transferred his loyalty to Jon Snow at the Wall, served as advisor during the Battle of the Bastards, and helped broker the alliance that gave Jon the forces to retake Winterfell. Davos Seaworth proved that the most powerful hands aren't always the most politically sophisticated. Sometimes they're simply the most honest. Lyonel Strong. Lyonel Strong doesn't get talked about enough. As Hand of the King under Viserys, the first Targaryen during the early years of House of the Dragon, Lord Strong represented exactly what the position was designed to produce: a loyal, capable administrator who placed the king's interests above his own family's advancement. Viserys appointed Lyonel after dismissing Otto Hightower, recognizing that Otto's advice had been consistently shaped by his personal ambition to place his grandchildren on the throne. Strong was different. He had no visible dynastic agenda, gave counsel based on what he genuinely believed served the realm, and supported Rhaenyra's claim as heir even when it conflicted with the interests of the Hightower faction surrounding Queen Alicent. His most significant contribution was stability, maintaining the small council's function during the increasingly fractious atmosphere of Viserys' court, as the tension between the Queen's faction and the Princess's faction began to harden into something more dangerous. His death was as political as his life. Alicent Hightower feared Lyonel's loyalty to Viserys, and Rhaenyra represented a permanent obstacle to her children's claim. His own son, Larys Strong, a man whose capacity for cold-blooded calculation rivaled anyone in the series, arranged for Lyonel and his elder brother to be burned alive inside Harrenhal, clearing the path for Otto Hightower's return as Hand. Lyonel Strong died because he was too good at his job and not ruthless enough to protect himself from the people around him. Corlys Velaryon. Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, was the wealthiest man in Westeros and one of the most accomplished naval commanders in history before he ever became Hand of the Queen. As the head of House Velaryon and Lord of Driftmark, Corlys had already sailed to every corner of the known world and built a fleet that rivaled the Iron Throne's own before Rhaenyra named him her hand during the Dance of the Dragons. His appointment was both strategic and personal. Rhaenyra needed Corlys's fleet, his wealth, and his political legitimacy. His grandchildren, through his son Lenor, were nominally Rhaenyra's children and heirs to the throne, giving him a direct stake in her victory. As Hand of the Queen, Corlys brought military discipline and logistical expertise to a war effort that desperately needed both. He commanded Rhaenyra's naval forces with the same relentless competence that had defined his earlier career, blockading King's Landing and cutting off supply lines to the Greens. But the Sea Snake was always more admiral than politician. His counsel was sound in matters of war and naval strategy, but the complex web of alliances, betrayals, and psychological manipulation that defined the Dance of the Dragons required a different kind of mind. He survived the war and watched Rhaenyra's cause collapse despite his efforts, a testament to how completely a civil war can destroy even the most capable commanders when the political foundations beneath them give way. Otto Hightower. Otto Hightower was operating on a timeline no one else could see. As Hand of the King, first under Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, and then under Viserys I, Otto spent decades patiently constructing the architecture of a plan whose full scope wouldn't become apparent until Viserys was on his deathbed, engineering the circumstances that would eventually place his grandson, Aegon II, on the Iron Throne. He was the only person in the history of Westeros to serve non-consecutive terms as Hand hand, returning to the position under Viserys after being dismissed for spreading rumors about Rhaenyra's behavior. That dismissal would have permanently ended most careers. Otto treated it as a temporary inconvenience. He returned to Old Town, maintained his network of contacts, and waited for the political climate to shift back in his favor, which it did when Viserys' health began failing. His defining moment came at Viserys' death, when Otto orchestrated the coronation of Aegon II before Rhaenyra could respond. A political operation executed with such speed and precision that it bypassed Viserys' own written succession, the small council's consultation, and any legitimate process entirely. Otto understood something fundamental about power in Westeros. It doesn't matter who has the rightful claim. It matters who moves first. As hand to Aegon II, he directed the early strategy of the Dance of the Dragons until Aegon dismissed him in favor of more aggressive advisors. Otto Hightower was never the most powerful man in any room he entered. He was simply always the one who had been planning the longest. Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion Lannister became acting hand of the king under the worst possible conditions, sent to King's Landing by his father Tywin to serve as a placeholder while Tywin continued his military campaign in the Riverlands. Joffrey was on the throne, Cersei was running the small council, the city was unstable, the treasury was empty, and a massive Baratheon fleet was sailing for King's Landing. Nobody expected Tyrion to last a month. He transformed the position completely. Within weeks, he had removed Janos Slynt from command of the City Watch for incompetence and replaced him with Bronn. He dismantled Cersei's attempt to control the council by feeding different false information to different members and identifying the leak. He negotiated the alliance with the Tyrells by arranging Joffrey's betrothal to Margaery, a political move that brought House Tyrell's enormous resources into the Lannister camp and ultimately won the war. And when Stannis Baratheon's fleet arrived at the Blackwater, Tyrion personally organized the city's defense, deployed the wildfire chain that destroyed half the attacking fleet, and led a sortie from the gates when the outer walls were breached. The Battle of the Blackwater was won largely because of Tyrion's preparation and tactical thinking. Then Tywin arrived with the Tyrell forces, claimed credit for the victory, and stripped Tyrion of the handship immediately. Tyrion was given a small apartment and a minor position on the small council as Master of Coin, a deliberate humiliation from a father who refused to acknowledge what his son had actually accomplished. The books make explicit what the show only implies. The realm was saved at the Blackwater by the acting hand, who received none of the credit. Septon Barth. Septon Barth is the hand most viewers have never heard of, and according to the Meisters of the Citadel, the greatest hand who ever served the Iron Throne. As hand of the king to Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, the longest reigning and most celebrated king in Westerosi history, Barth held the position for 41 years, longer than any other hand on record, and used that tenure to fundamentally reshape how the Seven Kingdoms functioned. A man of the faith, rather than a lord, Barth brought an approach to governance that was genuinely unusual for Westeros. He prioritized institutional stability over political advantage. He renegotiated the crown's debt with the Iron Bank of Braavos, converting a source of ongoing financial pressure into a stable, long-term arrangement that allowed Jaehaerys to invest in infrastructure across the realm. He began the Books of Law, the first systematic legal code in Westerosi history, standardizing the application of the king's justice across all seven kingdoms and reducing the arbitrary power of local lords over their small folk. He also served as Jaehaerys' closest intellectual companion, engaging in decades of correspondence and debate about history, religion, magic, and governance that produced some of the most significant writing in the Citadel's archives. The relationship between Jaehaerys and Barth wasn't just political, it was a genuine partnership between two men who shared a vision of what Westeros could become with competent, patient governance. Barth's legacy was so durable that the legal and financial structures he built lasted for over a century after his death. In a world where most hands were consumed by the politics of survival, Septon Barth simply governed. Tywin Lannister didn't become the most powerful hand in Westerosi history by accident. He built that power systematically over decades, starting at 19 years old when he crushed the rebellious houses Rhaen and Tarbeck, exterminating both bloodlines completely and flooding their underground castle with diverted river water to send a message so clear that it got turned into a song. The reigns of Castamere became shorthand throughout Westeros for one simple principle: cross House Lannister and your house stops existing. That reputation brought him to the attention of Aerys II Targaryen, who appointed Tywin Hand of the King at 20, the youngest in history. For 20 years, Tywin essentially governed Westeros, while Aerys descended into paranoia and madness. He settled the crown's debts, supported merchants, stabilized the economy, and maintained peace across the Seven Kingdoms through a combination of administrative competence and the constant, implicit threat of Lannister military power. Throughout the Seven Kingdoms, it was said openly that Tywin was the true ruler, not the king who wore the crown. His second tenure as Hand under Joffrey and Tommen demonstrated the same pattern at greater scale. He arrived at King's Landing after the Battle of the Blackwater, immediately took command of the War of the Five Kings strategy, engineered the Red Wedding, the single most devastating political stroke in the entire series, eliminating Robb Stark and the Northern Rebellion through a coordinated betrayal that broke the Stark cause permanently and dismantled every threat to Lannister supremacy within months. The Red Wedding alone redefined what political power looked like in Westeros. Tywin didn't fight Robb Stark in open battle. He turned Robb's own allies against him using Walder Frey and Roose Bolton, transformed a military stalemate into a catastrophic Lannister victory, and ended the War of the Five Kings on his own terms. The saying in Westeros went that a lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of sheep. Tywin Lannister proved it was true, and that the most dangerous predator in the Seven Kingdoms had never once sat on the Iron Throne. And that brings our list to an end. From Qyburn's cold-blooded service to Cersei's paranoia to Tywin's decades of absolute control, the hands of the king defined what power actually looked like in Westeros. Not the crown, not the sword, but the mind working behind both. Some governed with honor and died for it. Others governed with ruthlessness and built legacies that outlasted their kings. But the truth every hand eventually discovered is the same. The closer you stand to the throne, the shorter the distance to the floor beneath it. Let us know in the comments who you think was the greatest hand of the king, and leave a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the Game of Thrones universe.